this is awful. Okay.
Am I supposed to have this hat on or off? Off?
In the summer of 2014, more than 2 million people dumped buckets of ice over their heads, raising over $100 million in 30 days for research into ALS, a nerve cell disease. Why was the Ice Bucket Challenge so popular? Why did people participate so enthusiastically? Researchers at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business are using techniques from behavioral science and economics to analyze how and why people donate.
We thought that one characteristic of any social cause is that a large number of people are working together and you have information either on what other people are doing or what other people are not doing. We can see that some people are helping a social cause because everybody else is doing it and it's a big movement and I want to join the group. And some people are doing it just for the opposite reason. Okay, nobody's doing anything and so I need to jump in and help this cause because if I don't do, then no one else will do that. Okay, what we basically find is that people who are new to something, who don't really identify with the cause or with the victims, if it's a charity campaign helping people in some place, these people tend to be more influenced by information on what other people do, okay, on their half glass full. If everybody is doing it, I guess that's important and I will do something as well. And we distinguish these people from another group of people who are highly involved, who care about the cause, who are committed. And we find that for these people, it's more effective to emphasize what's still missing. You should, with this information on commitment, design messages that either emphasize what has been done versus what is yet needed to complete the campaign goal, such that if people are committed, then tell them what's missing, the glass half empty. If people are not committed, if they are still checking it out, then tell them that other people are giving, that half of the glass is full.
People are more likely to support causes they feel closer to. Fishbach compares it to clearing the table. You're more willing to clean up if the people who made the mess are your family, instead of strangers.
Okay. If it's at home, okay, and this is the closest group that we all have, and my family members didn't do their job and the place looks a bit messy, then I'll step in and clean up. Okay, so basically I'm compensating for what other people are doing. If they clean up, then I don't. Okay, if they don't clean up, then I do. Okay. However, if it's a new place, okay, and I don't feel very close to other people, and in general everybody's messy, then I'm not cleaning up. Okay, if everybody seems very tidy and no one leaves their empty mugs around, then I will not do that either. Okay, so in a way, when we are far from people, we tend to follow what they do. Okay, and when we feel close to them, then we compensate for what they don't do. So we basically did a study in which we presented these kids in Africa as either the kids of our world, okay, and the kids of our organization. Okay, these were people that belonged to this organization that was giving money to children in Africa, and we described this as our compassion children, or as the children out there, okay, far away in Africa. We can manipulate how much people feel they can identify with the people that are getting their contributions. We were able to show that when people feel that they are giving money to people that are close to them, they are more likely to give money if others don't. Okay? However, if they are giving money to people that they feel are distant, are not part of their group, they are more likely to give money if others do. Once we know how much people feel that they can identify with these receivers of their donations, then we should either emphasize what has been done versus what's missing.
Identifying with a cause is a start, but how do charities persuade people to get involved? Research suggests that people like to help more than they like to give. To see how this affects fundraising, researchers asked people to complete tasks to raise money directly for charity or to raise money for themselves, with the option of giving it to charity.
And under kind of a classic theory of motivation and economic behavior, working for the charity should always be worse and therefore less motivating, because if I'm earning the money myself, I always have the option of donating if I want to, right? And so given that I have more choice, that's always better and people should be more motivated. And the really surprising finding that we came up with was people actually worked harder and persisted in the task longer and earned more money when the money was earmarked directly for the charity, as opposed to when they earned it and had the option to donate. So I think there's a couple potential useful recommendations that come from these findings. One is kind of a general caution, which is to be very careful about inadvertently monetizing the interaction with volunteers in particular. Giving people some kind of token compensation could be really problematic because it could change the way the volunteers think of it from purely a kind of helping mindset where we're having this meaningful experience helping someone to now this is a transfer of resources, right? And so I think even things like compensating volunteers for expenses they've incurred has to be done very carefully so that it isn't translated for the volunteer into this kind of financial transaction. So default in general is just when you take an option that a person could choose and make it the option that'll happen if they don't choose otherwise, right? So if you go to the DMV and they ask you whether you want to be an organ donor, prior research has shown there's a big difference between you have to make the choice to sign up or you'll become an organ donor unless you choose otherwise, right? And so that's a classic example of a very effective default. So we got interested in defaults in the context of fundraising for charities because we realized that it's a very different kind of setting for defaults in a couple of ways. So one is that it's this active choice. People have to make a choice for the donation to happen. And the other is that people are choosing often among a range of options. So it's not just a binary, is this going to happen or is that going to happen? They're choosing, do I want to donate? And if I want to donate, how much do I want to donate? And we realized that the prior literature that had explored how defaults work and how defaults influence people's decisions didn't really provide clear guidance on what the right amount to set as the default would be. And so that's a question we wanted to explore.
Urminsky and his team offered potential donors different default amounts in drop-down menus on charity websites. In some circumstances, defaults proved effective in boosting donations.
So what we learned is that it's complicated and it's difficult to come up with a single prescription. When people are deciding about donating to a charity, they have kind of two different decisions to make. One is whether or not I want to donate, and the other is how much I want to donate. And by setting a default amount, it influences these two aspects of the decision differently. So if you set a lower amount as the default, there's no effect or maybe even a beneficial effect on the probability that a person will choose to donate, as opposed to setting a high default. If you set a high default, some people will look at that and say, almost kind of, too rich for my blood, I'm not going to donate, at least not this time. The problem is that once they've decided to donate, then the effect reverses. And so among people who've decided to donate, setting a low default kind of gives them permission to, it kind of says, even that small amount is enough. And so the lower the default amount, the lower the average donation. And I think what we've come away from in this research is that defaults can be a useful tool, but they are risky and they are variable. And so unfortunately, I think our best advice at this point for organizations looking to use defaults is to experiment, is to take their appeals and do kind of A/B testing where they look at using a high default or a moderate default or no default, try that in a campaign and figure out kind of the policy that's going to work best for their organization.
Our view of our future selves affects how much we give. Researchers asked people to think about how connected they will be to themselves in the future, and then asked how much they would like to donate to a charity. You might think that a strong sense of connection to your future self would be linked to more giving, but people who felt less connected were likely to give more. A study finds that people can be led to believe that they'll change a lot or a little in the future, and those beliefs might affect how much they will want to give to a charity.
And so the idea is, even if you're led to believe that you're going to change a lot in a year, such that you might not care as much about that future version of you, you're not going to change that much in a week. And so we didn't expect our manipulation of connectedness to have any effect there, and it didn't. But when we told people that the allocation was going to happen in a year, the manipulation did have an effect. So basically, people who were told that they were going to change a lot over the next year, those people gave more to charity.
So how could charities put this into practice? Bartels says they could ask people to think about how much they can give in the future, rather than today.
And so allocations in the present are going to be heavily influenced by self-interest, right? Deferring those allocations to charity might reduce the role of self-interest in determining how much to give. And then the second thing is that if people really feel like at that future date, they care less about the person they are, right? That these results suggest that might dial up the amount that they're willing to give. Decisions that we make in the moment are heavily influenced by our self-interest, and so that could work for two reasons. One is that I care less about who I am in a year. A second is that it's harder for me to anticipate the other things that I would have to use the money on in a year. So I think pledging to donate at some future time could be an effective means of increasing donations for lots of different psychological reasons.
Ready? All right.
So, what does the ALS Challenge teach us about philanthropy?
I think that one thing that they did very well is doing something unusual, and the novelty captured people's imaginations and attention.
ALS
Ice Bucket Challenge.
What we don't know is whether other campaigns try to introduce something funny, novel, maybe even weird, and we're not successful with it. And without systematically doing this research where we try to introduce novel ideas and see how likely they are to be picked up, it's hard to just look at the one example that was so successful and derive some conclusions from that beyond getting some hypothesis for what we can test in future research.
It may tap back into this idea of meaningfulness that we talked about, that unless I've kind of done something difficult or painful, it doesn't feel as meaningful. And so I think that was a key component, is that you were actually asking some people to do something that they could do. It was within everyone's means and ability to do, but was painful and therefore felt more meaningful. The other part is that I think pro-social goals are social goals. And so I think when we do pro-social things, part of what we want to get from it is kind of the social approval of others.
All right. Thanks, Tommy, for nominating me.
And I was nominated by my sister Susie Post.
So I was nominated by Ainsley Miziak.
Our involvement kind of goes farther if we can get others to be involved.
And I'd like to nominate Sam Kuzumano,
Daniel Bischoff,
John Gaska.
The ALS Challenge tapped really nicely into that part of the motive. There's lots of marketers out there trying to get things to go viral and get people to want to share, and I think pro-social things are a thing that people actually genuinely want to share. And if you can kind of prompt that idea out there and create a platform for that to happen, that's something where people will then jump on board.